Welcome, everyone. This is Mzuri Pambili, Nana Mzuri Pambili with the All African People's Revolutionary Party and All African Women's Revolutionary Union. I want to welcome you to our All African Women's Revolutionary Union and Pan-African Women's Organization collaborative event. We are calling this African Women Must Lead. So this is the last program contribution for us for International Women's Month. We have an amazing panel of comrades from South Africa all the way through the Caribbean to the United States. And so we think we're well represented. We hope to have more that will join us in the coming months as we continue this campaign. But before we get started, I want to welcome you all and ask you to make sure that you mute your mics and leave your videos off if you are not a presenter on the panel. So just appreciate that. We're also recording this event, and for those who aren't able to attend, it will be available on YouTube. We will upload it on YouTube very shortly. So thank you all for joining us, Asante Sana, Madasi, and Kosi. And so we want to get started by introducing everyone else that is on the panel. So Sister Zandiswe and Mohau, can you introduce yourselves?
Greetings to everyone, everyone that's basically watching today's discussion. My name is Zandiswe Kula, and I am from South Africa, from the East, or the Eastern Cape as we call it in South Africa. And I currently reside in Johannesburg, and I'm a member of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, which is the PAC, and also a member of the women wing of the PAC, and that is the Pan-Africanist Women's Organization. And it is a great honor to be here today and to be in discussion with Pan-Africanist women about the struggles that African women face or deal with on a daily basis, and how we organize ourselves as African people in relation to our struggle. Thanks.
Welcome, welcome. So glad to see you again. Thank you. Greetings, Sister Mohau. Welcome. Mike, yeah.
Greetings, Sister Mzuri. What a great honor it is, and greetings to all the sisters on the panel. This is an amazing event. I think the beginning of many great things to come. My name is Mohau Pheko. I am a member of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania and many other organizations, but that is my political home. I'm also a member of the Pan-Africanist Women's Organization, and we are ready to lead. And we're extremely excited that we are collaborating with sisters around the world to get this movement where women can lead up and running. Izwe lethu.
Izwe lethu, Africa. And Sister Mjiba.
Yes, good afternoon and greetings from Accra, Ghana. My name is Sister Mjiba Frehiwot, and I am a member of the, All African People's Revolutionary Party and All African Women's Revolutionary Union. I am happy to be part of this amazing panel as we begin to have conversations about how to smash patriarchy and how to ensure that African women take their rightful place in the African Revolution. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. And Sister ChenziRa, I see you were able to join us from II.
Greetings. I'm going to first and foremost say Hotep greetings, revolutionary greetings to my honorable, illustrious, and very hardworking sisters around the globe that are prepared to envelop and embrace African Women Must Lead, which we know is our time. I am a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. The other seat that I hold is as High Commissioner General for the Caribbean Americas in the Universal Negro Improvement Association African Communities League, RC 2020, under the leadership of PG Akili and Nkrumah. And I have the honor and privilege of also serving as one of the founders of Ankh, Smai Tawi, that focuses on the importance of African women leading. I'm looking forward to this fantabulous panel.
Yes, and I see you're in transit, probably taking people to the airport from the UNIA retreat there. So we thank you for all your work in all forms. Of course, this is why African women must lead. We must organize transportation so that we can do our programs.
Exactly.
So we welcome you all and all of our audience to this event. This is the beginning of something we have been talking about for many, many years, and it is the reality of the majority of the population of African people around the world are women. And we have suffered so much in the Pan-African globe, but our history is one of great civilizations based on societies that had their visions and had their social construct and economic foundations grounded in the patrilineal system. And with that, we had full participation in every aspect of life. We had control of land, civil societies, economics, our cultural aspects, as well as the rites of passage in every aspect of our being. But as we were reminded by President Sékou Touré, that the patrilineal system marks on its first the historic defeat suffered by women. The explanation lies in the overriding need for dominating nature to ensure the economic survival of the society and also for enslaving other societies. And so we realize that the matrilineal system suffering that defeat still operates in small ways in various areas of the African world. We realize that, but at the same time, the societies around the globe are dominated by capitalism. They are dominated by imperialism. And with that being said, patriarchy dominates as a social construct, and the power that we once had has been lost through those processes of not having our power within the social constructs of the society. And our control and our influence and our gender rights and our impact in terms of governmental structures, the environment, and all that impact our life is really dominated by capitalism and imperialism. And today we find the continent and around the world in a pervasive construct of neocolonialism, which Nkrumah says is the last stage of imperialism. Neocolonialism is a contradictory system that dominates our societies, and it's controlled by foreign powers. And so with this being said, we find that it has played out in constant dominating forces, both internal and external to Africa, with armed militias who create border conflicts and coups every other month, destabilizing the society, especially women and children, in war-torn areas, border wars, which are artificial borders created by capitalists and imperialists during the colonial era, the migration and the thousands of deaths annually that occur to African people, especially women and children. And African people are the largest population on this planet that are living outside of the country of their birth because of this destabilization. There are 15 civil or border wars or more occurring in Africa today, and this is not the intention of the revolutions that took place in the 60s and 70s and 80s. The intention of the women and men of MPLA, PAIGC, TANU, PDG, FRELIMO, PAC, ANC, ZANO, and other revolutionary movements, the intention was full and complete liberation. And so for us, we realize that what is happening today, and especially during the pandemic from 2020 to 2021, and even today, has really magnified the contradictions of capitalism. It has magnified the contradictions of imperialism. And we find African women, especially, living outside more of our reigns of power. And so it is our call that we build a pro-human, pro-mass movement that encourages women and non-men and men allies to join with us to be able to break down the cultural constructs, the societal constructs, the economic and the political constructs that create the violence that we experience, that destabilize our societies, that destabilize our lives on a daily basis. And for this, we need to occupy every space of power. And we'll talk more about that in the coming months. But this campaign for African Women Must Lead is a campaign that we are sending out to all revolutionary women, all revolutionary femmes, revolutionary Pan-Africanists especially. We want to write papers, we want to continue to do programs, and we want to work in a practical way to find solutions so that we can occupy every space of power and better control our lives, and therefore outline our vision and our destiny for socialism, peace, justice, and a better way of life for all of humanity. So for that, we want to welcome you. We want to encourage you, those who are interested in joining the campaign, that are in organization. We want to encourage you to consider joining our campaign. You can email me at Pambeli, Pambeli at AOL.com. You can communicate with us on Facebook through our AAWRU page, our Revolutionary African Women page, or the AAPRP page as well. So again, welcome. That is a part of the campaign. So we now want to go to our next panelist, Sister Mjiba, to talk about unmasking patriarchy.
Thank you very much, Sister Comrade Mzuri. Your introduction ultimately told my story, so I won't take up too much of the collective's time, but I've been tasked with discussing something that seems extremely simple: unmasking patriarchy, right? And so when I thought about this discussion, I said to myself, Mjiba, what do people think patriarchy really is? And how do we think that it manifests itself? And so I said, let me do a quick Google search on patriarchy. Did a quick Google search, and according to dictionary.com, just quick Google search, patriarchy is a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descendant is traced through the male line. It's also a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. It's also a society or community organized on patriarchal lines. All of these things are correct. But what I think is most significant about these definitions is that patriarchy, what's left out is that patriarchy is an oppressive, repressive system, which is tied to capitalism, is tied to neocolonialism, and is tied to imperialism. And I think it's also important for us to note, both as women and men and non-men, is that patriarchy is manifested in our everyday lives. Because one could say, well, what's wrong with, the man being the head of the household? It's always been that way, so why change it now? If it's not broke, don't change it. Many people can say that. But the reality is that patriarchy is not just about a man being the head of the household. Patriarchy is not just about excluding women from governance. patriarchy is certainly not just about, land and inheritance transcending from male to male. Patriarchy is a system which systematically oppresses women in general, African women in particular. Patriarchy is laced in our education system, both formal and informal. Patriarchy is part of our culture and it's socially constructed. I know some of us say, oh no, but African culture or traditional culture is so amazing. How can it be anti-women? How can it be patriarchal? Well, the reality is several cultural practices, even those that we identify as traditional African practices, are harmful to women, met violence on women through everything from exclusion to actual economic violence, social violence, and even political violence, right? And so when we're thinking through what we even believe and how we practice patriarchy, one must recognize that patriarchy manifests itself multiple ways in our everyday lives. And I want to give a couple of examples so that we are really clear what this means. Where I'm sitting here in Ghana, right? I love Ghana. I made my decision to make my contributions for Pan-Africanism in Ghana. But in Ghana, it's extremely important for young women to be married. Not young women, women in general. And if one is not married, one is oftentimes, in some cases, not considered relevant to society. One must be a mother and a wife. And the pressure on young women and women in general to be married, to be wives and mothers is extremely strong. Women who are not wives and mothers are oftentimes pressured societally, and not necessarily individually one-on-one, but societally to get married, to have children, and to be wives. So much so that women often sit back from the development process in order to be a mother and a wife. Another example, and I'll use some of the examples, that I have experienced recently. Another example is when women find themselves in leadership positions or at the university, or even deciding that they don't want to participate in patriarchal behavior. They are faced with massive amounts of repression, both by women and men, and oftentimes as a result or through this notion that African culture doesn't do this, right? And so I also think it's important to note that what we call African culture, oftentimes we romanticize African culture. And we think everything that is African culture or African or traditional is positive. And the reality is that it's not. Culture is ever growing and moving. It is dynamic, which means that the relationship between African culture, everything that we do, including our ideology, to women is ever growing and ever moving. And so we must understand that this ever moving and ever growing culture's relationship to the role and responsibility of African women, not just in the revolution, but in the development process of Africa and Pan-Africanism, should also be ever moving and ever growing. I have about 1 minute to go, and I want to give 2 more examples. We are all in some kind of revolutionary organizations, and many of our revolutionary organizations are laced with patriarchy embedded in the institutions. So much so that even women in the organizations promote, practice patriarchy as well, right? And this is because as revolutionary organizations, we are not divorced or separate or outside of society, but we are part of society. And the society in which we're in is driven by a capitalist ideology, a capitalist economy, which is tied to a capitalist ideology, which ultimately uses patriarchy and the oppression of women in order to continue to divide African people. In my 37 seconds left, I want to make three key pronouncements. The first I want to say is that African women certainly must lead the revolution to the next level. We've seen that African women have always been leading Pan-African and revolutionary movements, but right now it's vital for us to lead this revolution. But in order for us to lead this revolution, we need to lead a revolution in our education process. We must transform the way in which we are educating African people globally to discuss, to debate, and to engage with this question of patriarchy. And last but not least, as African women, we must shed our patriarchal participation, our patriarchal views, knowingly or unknowingly, in order for African women to move to the next level in the African Revolution. And finally, this is my fourth point, as I'm about 2 seconds over. It's important as African women who want to lead the revolution or be part of the revolutionary process, we must push brothers inside of this process to be as strong fighters against patriarchy as we are. Thank you very much.
Nkosi Asante Sana Madasi, Sister Mjiba, very strong, powerful points. And for our audience, we will open it up after all of the presenters have spoken to make comments. If you could raise your hand if you're in the Zoom, if you want to make comments after the last presenter. So again, you made some very solid points, Sister Mjiba. Thank you for that. And I think it's very important also to realize that even in our silence, in our inactivity, we give power to patriarchy because they move us through the process. When we say nothing, we're moved through the process. And they continue to wane power over us as long as we are not organized, as long as we don't have our voice and say what it is we need and to create what we need in terms of our moving forward. So once again, thank you for those strong points. Our next panelist, Sister Zandiswe, will speak on women taking power and control. Zandiswe?
Thanks, Mzuri, for that introduction. And also thank you to the speaker that went just now, Sister Mjiba, right? Yeah. I think that my theme, which speaks to women taking control and taking power, right? It's not a conversation that has just begun today, right? It has been a conversation that has taken place since 1909 and 1910, when the international working women, in actual fact in America, were waging a struggle there, calling for a recognition of their rights in relation to them being part or participating within that society, right? And we link that obviously to the struggles of Pan-Africanist women, right? Women like Mamzinga, right? Women like Neo Esther Chipape, right? To women like Mam Veronica Sobukwe, and many other legendary women in actual fact, who have died and gave their lives in actual fact to the struggle, not only for the liberation of mankind, but also intertwining the liberation of women, right? Or the role of women within society and in the struggle itself. So I think that whenever it is that we are talking about the question of power and control, we ought to be able to contextualize that, right? And the reason for that is because there's a constant disjuncture of what is it that we talk about when we are talking about power, and what is it that we are talking about when we're talking about control. And also another knee-jerking matter in relation to this to this theme or this topic is that whenever it is that we speak about women taking power, there's the constant need for people to think that we want to replace men within this current society and system, which on its own, in actual fact, is a distortion of the power that we speak of and the control or the significance in relation to the role that women play within society, but also recognizing the concrete material conditions, in actual fact, where African women have been suffering and where they have been exploited or they have been at the helm of exploitation, of oppression, and all forms, in actual fact, of domination, and one of them being patriarchy, as Sister Mjiba had spoken about, right? colonialism, imperialism, and many other forms of domination that have constantly sought, in actual fact, to stagnate the growth, not only of mankind, but women in general. And it becomes important for us to be able to locate the conversation in relation to what then is the power that we're talking about. So in the current form, the exercise of power is that the powerful people, right, exploit and continue, in actual fact, to grind, right, on those of whom they dominate. And history has decided, in actual fact, that the African people be the people that are the most exploited, right? And as tools of history ourselves, we ought to be able to understand how that comes about. How do the African people become exploited? Why are the African people exploited, right? So that we are able to understand what is the form of power, in actual fact, which is used to control the demise of our oppression and our exploitation. So when we speak of power, we talk about the changing or the uprooting of the current system, which is capitalism, which is imperialism, which is patriarchy, and many other forms of domination, right, that I've already spoken about. And we want to be able to not reform society in the current sense of things. We want to be able to create a new form of existence for the exploited, oppressed peoples of Africa and globally when you're talking about humankind, right? And the reason why we are able to talk about humankind is when we will have dealt or answered the question of the African people, because we understand them to be the most exploited peoples of the world, right? And we understand that the only people capable of bringing a new form of existence, one that will be able to acknowledge their human status, and also, for instance, not just the question of their human rights, meekly so, but their liberation, right? Where a people can be able to govern themselves holistically and create, for example, systems that are able to answer to their living conditions where they are at. And we understand that in Africa, it has to be an Africanist approach or Pan-Africanist in form, right? And it has to be democratic to be able to recognize, right, the call from the downtrodden African people and also their governance, right, in relation to what then becomes a form of governing, right? And that very much so is a socialist way of living, where it's the dictatorship, in actual fact, of the oppressed peoples. Now, in order for us to be able to understand the significance of power and control of women, we have to also understand that women are located as the most oppressed and exploited peoples of the world. So whenever it is that anyone speaks of a revolution, it's not aloof, right? It's a revolution determined and dictated by these tools, right? And those tools are women. And it's important for us to be able to understand that women play a pivotal part in forming and structuring or constructing society. And we ought to be able to acknowledge that and not merely acknowledge it for the sake of extending a green leaf, some would say, but because we understand the dynamics of human existence, right? That each person has a particular role to play. Now, a person that I remember remarkably would say that when we want to deal with the question of human beings or mankind, we are looking at the question of how does mankind live in harmony, right, together. And when you are able to restore and relocate the place of women within society, you are able to understand that women themselves are a human factor, right? As they have been historically so. And we also acknowledge the fact that colonialism and the dispossession of women within our society had presented a new dynamic in terms of where we locate women within our society. So, for example, women stopped tending the land for their own interests or communal benefits, and also creating a society that synthesizes with their humanity as human beings completely belonging to themselves. They were then relegated to a position where they were working for someone else. They were feeding other children's, other women's babies. When you listen to the stories of colonialism, you would hear at times that in actual fact, Black women were feeding or breastfeeding or nursing, you could call it that, your white babies. And what does that do? What happens to our children in relation to that? There's a void in relation to who is it that raises our children and how they do that as well, right? And we've always understood that this system has never, in actual fact, favored the existence of African people holistically, right? And then how dare would they then acknowledge the existence or affirm the humanity, that of women? Hence, we then always constantly say that the place and the control and the power of women within the world can never be found within this current state of affairs. Hence, it then becomes important to uproot the current state of affairs, right? To then create a socialist order that will reaffirm the position of women, because women will be leading that struggle themselves. And Sankara always says that a revolution, right, can never take place or can never happen without the liberation of women, simply because he has identified that women play a central role within our society. Economically, they have been reduced to economic tools, in actual fact, who constantly are on a banger to be able to provide for their families with the work that they do, lesser pay than that of men. And this current setup or this system, what it does is that whenever it speaks about locating women in relation to the economic question or the dynamic of empowering women, right, or the system and government itself, what it does is that it merely just puts 2 or 3 bodies and replaces, in actual fact, a few male counterparts. And then it merely just puts women into that space. And what that does is that it doesn't create, right, a society, and also it doesn't give women power to be able to now change the terms of reference, but also change society. Hence, we do not talk about the occupation of space for the sake of it. We talk about the taking and control of power, because we understand that to be able to bring sustainable solutions and change, but also in terms of creating a new world outside capitalism and imperialism. And also in terms of culture itself has taken away, right, as well. And it has deprived women of an opportunity to exercise their human obligation as people who form part of a society and system, right? What happens is that we are merely told that in order for you to be able to have social status, you ought to be married and carry a particular family name, right? Or they will say to you that all you have to do is tend to babies and give birth, and that's merely all you have to do. And then what happens there is that women are taken away from the space of power, right? By the construct of the very culture and the economic system. And also at times you find that women defend the need or the understood practice where women do not necessarily form part of decision-making exercises within society. Now, what happens there is that you create a patriarchal, chauvinist system, in actual fact, which only identifies the existence of human beings to be that of man-bodied. And that on its own has happened within our political spaces as well, where the political face, right, and even the ideological turner in relation to the struggle of an oppressed people becomes that of male-dominated or peoples, right? Or it becomes male-dominated. And then women just remain or as cheerleaders, and people who are pawns within a game of or political game of men. And whenever it is that women even take power in a setup of that nature, and the power is not centered around identifying the interests of women, it simply just becomes a replica where we continue to oppress women. We continue to have a single-handed narrative where men control the order of the day within the political setup, and that refuses us an opportunity as women to being able to participate in fashioning a new form of society, one that recognizes the significance of our humanity as the African people, but also that understands that the exploited people, right, who are oppressed, in actual fact, should be the ones that dictate the means of human existence, if I could call it that, or human interest in general, right? And not only politically, socially, economically, and in every other form or way, in actual fact, that has a kali or anything in relation to the modes or structures of power within society that basically are able, for example, to help us find ways of how do we better exist within this current world, and what shall be the order of the day, right? So
1 more minute,
it does not
sis.
become. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So it does not just become a conversation for today, because we are having a discussion. I like that this is an ongoing conversation of women who are organizing in different spaces, right? And women who have encountered, in actual fact, all of these contradictions within the political organizations and also the social setup in which we are in. And then it becomes important that we understand that it is not by favor or just by a gratitude form of extension as to why women must lead, but it's a matter of necessity and importance in realizing what the obligation for the oppressed people then becomes, who are African. So I'll just leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Nkosi, Sister Zandiswe. Excellent points that were made, and I know that we want to make sure after ChenziRa speaks that we give Sister Mohau a few minutes to speak before we open it up. But I think those were excellent points, and we can talk after the panelists have finished about more input on power and control and what that means, especially, as PAC says, the bread and butter issues that impact African women and non-men. So thank you again, Nkosi. I appreciate your commitment to this campaign and for this continuing discussion, because it is our responsibility to advance this. If we don't advance it, we continue to be oppressed. So we are going to find ways to advance it, even in our local communities, right? So this is going to be ongoing. So I want to welcome Sister ChenziRa, who will be speaking on alternative models of power. And so Dr. Chen.
Good morning, blessed morning, Hotep. I'm settled now, I'm not driving. Make sure I highlight that. First and foremost, I would like to really give thanks for the opportunity to even be able to share amongst sistren who are making a distinction between those that are willing to push a Pan-African revolutionary to some universal Pan-African vibration to how we move forward. When we speak of these power alternative models, and I just desire to take a second, because sometimes when we're even using these terms of power, control, women must lead, it gets misinterpreted as if, as our comrade just shared, that we're attempting to replace it, moving from power overload with the patriarchy into a power overload into the matriarchy. and it can be seen as another form of oppressive engagement, and that's not what our intentions are. And it's very important for persons to be able to recognize that and receive that well. When we're speaking of African women must lead, and how do we develop new models, and that term model is funny for me because sometimes models are designed and they get broken quickly. So I prefer to use the term of framework, and a framework that is living, a framework that is living, and a framework that is revolutionary, that incorporates that change is constant, that incorporates dialectical materialism, that incorporates historical materialism, that incorporates that there are new elements that we have to add. And just as Comrade Sister and Mjiba, there's some models in our African social construct and our societies that have to be discarded because they are not useful. They are not progressive. They do not facilitate African women moving in leadership in a practical sense. I do desire to just highlight power and control are very funny terms in the English language because they can both serve as nouns and it can also serve as verbs. And when we speak of them in that context, I'll use power, for example, just that ability to really engage and develop a capacity to directly influence what is going on, just as a noun. And then when we speak of power as a verb, then we're talking about energy. And we're talking about what people refer to as mechanical energy or electrical energy, but at the core, it's about energy and exchange. And many times when women come to certain spaces and we come in a very ma'atical truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness place, some circles, some organizations aren't able to handle that because women will come in a space of power that comes with an energy that demands engagement and it demands change. And sometimes that change is not well received so that we can actually grow our communities, start at the beginning, grow within ourselves to be able to be more positive contributors to our families, to our village, to our nation, to our society, to civilization. And most importantly, to be able to transform that vibration around that term control. Again, it's also used as a noun, sometimes as a verb, but as a noun, we're talking about that way in which people are able to compare, check certain engagements, and have direct influence over the behavior in the course of events. And that's very serious because then we're speaking of control in a form of how it's engaging within the African revolutionary movement and how that affects the wider society that we live in. With control as a verb, then we're starting to talk about the actual performance of that given behavior. And sometimes persons aren't comfortable with our women, our African women, authentically leading. And henceforth, we have these different social structures that customarily will keep women in a space that is very limiting. And what does that do usually? If you attempt to control that which is authentically powerful, it will go through. There will be no obstacle that will resist or be able to resist. And that's why having this particular type of reasonment and engagement is really, really fitting. There are several organizations, as I shared in my welcoming opening, that I work within. One of the reasons why the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union has stayed in the core for some decades is because of the commitment to that vibration of the total liberation and unification of Africa under a scientifically socialist government as brought forth by the honorable ancestor, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, alongside many other revolutionaries. And I'd like to highlight that the thrust within the union that provides another layer of this alternative model, this alternative framework of how we engage, is that we have to bring truth to power. It's essential for us to be able, we cannot be speaking of a revolutionary consciousness, a revolutionary movement, a revolutionary engagement, and then in-house, we are accepting subservient, inferior interaction and engagement. And one of the suggestions is to incorporate a way in which we begin to utilize how we speak to each other, our language systems, how we communicate with each other, so that it does not come across as harsh and overbearing, but that we begin to use open, specific forms of talk, speech, engagement, so that people understand what we're speaking of. Definition of terms is really critical, so that we're all speaking on the same place. There's a linguistic barrier that many of our sisters have, because we do live on different places on the earth where some are speaking African languages, some are speaking European languages, and everything in between. And we have to work on that layer of developing models of engagement and interaction that facilitate our ability to communicate more effectively. In this last 45 seconds, I just would like to highlight that there are organizations that are connected to universal African fundamentalism, grounded in the Garvey vibration and pulling from Marcus Garvey's work, specifically the work that was documented by who? Amy Ashwood Garvey, Amy Jacks Garvey, and many others, Henrietta Vinton Davis, again, and many others. So within the UNIAACL, there's another shift happening that is parallel to what we're speaking about. This is also happening in organizations like the Caribbean Pan-African Network, that again, usually is seen as very masculine, very male dominant in terms of the leadership, the representation. Many of our sisters, and I would like to just take a second to just highlight many of the sisters that are involved in these Pan-African movements in this region where I sit in the Caribbean are powerful beyond measure. And the opportunity to develop ways of how we communicate, ways of how we engage in our organizational management, ways that we engage in our educational systems, and of course, ultimately, how we engage in our economic development systems that will allow for our women that are dealing with their families, dealing with their communities, are able to actually contribute, so that money, funding, time are not an issue. And with that, I'll close so we can open up for discussion. Giving thanks. Sotep.
Thank you, Asante Sana, Madasi, ChenziRa. Before I make a few additional comments, and I think you made some powerful points, I want to ask Sister Mohau if you have any additional points, frames of reference, comments that were provided by any of or all of the speakers.
Thank you very much, Sister Mzuri, and thank you so much to the powerful presentations from all the sisters. I think that I just want to make a few points very quickly. I think the first point that I want to make in creating a new future for ourselves as leaders in the world, it's important to point out that this is not the first time that this has been done. We stand on the shoulders of some of the greatest women leaders here on the African continent, who commanded armies, who ran states, and reinvented even the way in which democracy is looked at. So we have to analyze that. We have to revisit that. What made them successful? What made them lose power? And what was the nature of the power that they brought to the table? I think that's really, really critical and fundamental. I think also, and it came out in almost all of the presentations, is the need to actually reinvent the space and restructure it and even disrupt the space. And to look at power in terms of resources, to look at power as Sister ChenziRa was saying, within our own organizations, the debate, decoding that language and recreating a language that creates a unity and a harmony of how we understand. But we also have to understand that, at least from our point of view as a Pan-Africanist Congress Women's Organization, is that we want power in order to run state power. That's fundamental for us. We don't want just a space at the table We want power to run states, to run the continent. And I think that that's very, very important for us. I think also we need to interrogate terms like citizenship, terms like democracy, even terms like sovereignty, because they've all been masculinized and keep women out. So I think it's critical for us. I think it was Sister ChenziRa who was saying that developing a language of how we communicate with each other. So I think that we have to decode the language, decode the discourse, decode the paradigms, so that we can really begin to see a future that really sees women leading, women running states, women running their communities. And I'm not apologetic. I think we need a sharp and a strong masculine critique against toxic masculinity, even within our organizations. It's very fundamental. Thank you, Sister Mzuri.
Excellent points. And I think that we want to make clear also that when we speak of fighting gender violence and changing the society so that it is a society for all, we're talking about a multi-gender movement. We're talking about breaking the social and political and cultural constructs that we have lived in that are dominated by colonialism and imperialism and the culture of those entities that have dominated Africa. And so I think the points about language and about structure, questioning all of those, I think are very, very important. And I think also when we talk about creating models and alternatives, Cuba, in some of their latest congresses, they have decided to democratize the household, because the household is usually the place to a certain extent where women have all of the responsibility and control. But in Cuba, to liberate women so that they have a multi-diverse impact on the society, they're being able to play representatives in the party, they've been able to have educational experience, they've been able to take on responsibilities on other levels. They have democratized the household so that everyone has responsibilities. The partners in the adult partners in the household have responsibilities. There are various communities where women are creating justice tribunals or justice circles that are dealing with violence, with gender violence. And they're actually creating systems where the perpetrators are being addressed, where they're providing counseling and support and housing, very similar to what Wangari Maathai was able to do, our great ancestor in Kenya. And so many of these various alternative forms of power and organization are things we should talk about. Even inside of our party, we must democratize our book list. It must be inculcated with all the names of the warriors that have, especially the non-men warrior books and stories that have taken power. They need to be dominated throughout our book list so that we can read and study about all of those. I think that that is a part of the necessity to enhance our political process and to expand our consciousness. And so much of what we are talking about are things we're going to continue to talk about and continue to do and advocate for. And so I want to thank everyone on the panel for your contributions. We have a few minutes here, and I wanted to ask our community that is on, anyone want to raise their hand to make comments or ask questions very briefly. Anyone from the audience? Evan. Please unmute. Go ahead.
Oops, sorry. I thought I'm unmuting myself. Sorry. So thank you. Once again, thank you so much for all the words and understanding how we must move forward. Just one thing. How, to my extent, I'm part of the SntDr task force. To what extent should how much further should sorry. Let's see.
Take your time.
Let's see. I agree with your point as far as the multi-gender aspect of this democratization of the party. To what extent how much further do you think we need to go in order to make sure that not only are women involved in gaining power and being more integrated with our party, but also the people of marginalized genders are also, I feel like they're not left out of the conversation.
I personally, and again, any panelist can address this, but I think the organization, the organization is open, and those that organize themselves in such a way so that there is a space created to impact the organization through political work, dialogue, and engagement. I think in various aspects, just like the AAWRU organized itself to create a women's union so that we can focus on these issues, I think the same should happen for those non-women that feel left out. There must be organization in a sense that allows them to identify what contradictions exist, how can we overturn those contradictions or address them, and solutions to resolving those contradictions. These are the things that the AAWRU has tried to do, and we're still working on those. Those contradictions still exist, and we're still working on those. Messenger audio. But I think that these are some of the things that that we need to do. Any other panelists want to address that question?
Mzuri, I would like to make a small contribution if acceptable.
Please.
Thank you. Comrade Evans, I think that's an excellent question. And I would like to also reinforce what Sister Mzuri said around, individuals who are non-men, who have, but have different non-hetero orientations, right? Need to definitely organize themselves as in a union, a representation, something to advocate on behalf of their needs. And I think the challenge that we have in many of these organizations is, like, for example, our All African Women's Revolutionary Union. One expects that the AAWRU should address every contradiction that falls under the social revolution sun, right? That falls under that is impacted by patriarchy, and one, that's not humanly possible, but two, honestly, but based on our experiences, it's not practical, right? So, for example, I am not queer. I don't identify as queer. I am down with an alliance with individuals who identify as queer or questioning or lesbian and gay, but that's not my reality. So quite frankly, I can advocate based on what I think is relevant for this community, but the community needs to also be pushing this, pushing how they want to be incorporated into any organization to the forefront. For those of us who don't have the same experiences, can then also advocate 100% alongside our queer comrades, right? And so I think that for me, I think that what I'm suggesting ultimately is, yes, the AAPRP and many organizations have a far way to go. I mean, African women are still unfortunately impacted by patriarchy in all of our organizations, right? And so much less individuals who are queer or gender non-conforming or who don't fit the heteronormative roles, right? How much more oppressed or repressed or even pushed into a small corner are individuals whose reality this is. So 100% that there's much more mileage that needs to be driven, but it also has to be driven by communities in which that will be most affected. And those of us who can jump in the car and give navigation and fight the fight alongside our comrades, we're 100% here. So anyways, that's my point. Thank you.
I want to welcome Erica. Brother Suja, I see your hand up. I want to get as many identifying non-men first on the call, and then I will reach out to others. Erica?
Yes, good afternoon, Peace Africans. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm really enjoying this conversation. A lot of what the speakers brought up reminded me of what I've been reading about the PAIGC and the concept of two colonialisms. And then also I was reading
Excellent book.
Yeah, and I was also reading recently about the revolution in Zimbabwe, where the woman talked about, taking care of the kids and going right back into the forest. So in today's movement, I don't see much space or recognition given to the idea that we can fight two battles at a time. I think so much of it is interest-based activism or interest-based organizing, where I guess they don't see the primary contradiction that's upholding patriarchy or the primary contradiction that's upholding capitalism. So what are some steps that the AAPRP or the All African People Women's Union are utilizing to sort of push forward the idea of two colonialisms or fighting two colonialisms, as opposed to fighting patriarchy? And then once we're done with that, we can get to fighting capitalism.
I'd like for our two sisters from Pan-Africanist Congress to address that. Zandiswe or Mohau?
There are no contradictions. Our struggle is always multi-pronged. And I don't think that we get to choose, what comes first or what comes last, because there is such a diversity, at least from our experience, there is such a deep diversity amongst the women, just in terms of class, in terms of language, in terms of education. There's so many diversities that we don't have the luxury of fighting one struggle at a time. It's really learning to integrate them, and that takes a lot of listening to each other, number one, a lot of understanding the pattern of how we are going to integrate our issues. It needs a mass mobilization, a critical mass of women to understand the issues and be able to articulate them in different spaces, at different levels of the movement. And these are really important. So I would say organizationally, you really need a multi-pronged GPS to be able to navigate the space. I think what is important, though, is to know what the priority issues are at that moment. They won't be the same as next month or last year or 10 years from now. But there are critical issues that women are confronting now that we have to emphasize and put a lot of priority on. But it does not stop us from fighting at many levels. And it's important to be well organized, understand who is able to do what, understand also the moment, when is the right moment to strike? What is the environment like? So I think these are all important pieces that as the movement, as Africa Women Must Lead, these are the sorts of issues I think we need to probably run masterclasses on and share a broad range of experiences from different parts of the world.
We'll make note of that in our next discussion, because I think that's a very important point. I think it's the same with what Evan raised, is that the fight for democratization of our society includes all genders. And so even males, even boys and men are exploited through capitalism and imperialism. So when we destroy capitalism, when we destroy neocolonialism, and we all must do it. It's not going to happen from a magic wand. Superman is not going to do it. Iron Man is not going to save us. It must be the masses of our people. So if the masses, if the majority of our brothers and our women and our non-male genders and allies are all fighting to destroy capitalism, then we will create the new society for us all. And so it's very connected, it's very integrated, and the prior struggles have shown that, the integration. Brother Suja, I saw your hand was up, so I wanted to give you an opportunity if you had a question.
Asante for that, Sister Mzuri, Queen Sister Mzuri. I appreciate you and the sisters, Sister ChenziRa and others who put this together, the opportunity to be here and witness what you all are doing and offer whatever support that we are able to. I wanted to ask a question, and this is triggered by a series of discussions that I've been having with brothers in the last couple of days, and it relates to the comment that was made, or the comments that have been made about addressing varied aspects of culture that contribute to the struggle that women have being recognized as rightful people to lead, and all of the other concerns related to the status of women. And I've been engaging in this discussion about spiritual traditions and religion and all of that. And of course, we know that a lot of these diminished perceptions of women emerge from, these religious narratives that men have created over time. And because that's been on my heart and mind, and I've been actively engaging that, as I listened to the discussion, I just wondered what the thought was about the need to address some of those stories. And, from that standpoint, from the spiritual, religious standpoint, what is being done? What do you all think needs to be done to engage the perception of women as it relates to the spiritual traditions and the way that contributes to diminished perceptions of women?
Anyone from the panel?
I would love to offer a brief commentary in that regard. I started by saying that we have to restore how we engage in language and how we communicate. And when I spoke of truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness and harmony, I was speaking of an ancestral, African, spiritually guided system that is very feminine, right, of Ma'at. And when we restore Ma'at on how we engage with each other and do that piece by piece, in our organizational meetings, as Sistren have said, how we engage with power and control in our respective organizations and societies, how we're able to help sisters to deal with their economic realities of where they are, and being able to offer that support. It will make the spiritual grounding a little easier, and persons would be more receptive, so we do not get caught up in religiosity versus spirituality. We do not get caught up in demonocracy or colonialocracy instead of authentic, balanced, harmonious, what I refer to as ma'atokrasi, because that's what I've been taught, to be able to fuse what is spiritual, not the mojo jojo stuff, but that is authentically grounded in the most positive elements of our African spiritual systems and societies, barring those that are patriarchal, barring those that are exclusive to women in our rightful places of power, authority, and engagement. And through that, perhaps with the masses' support, of course, we would be able to get beyond that limitation that people have around African spiritual systems, African spirituality, et cetera, so that it is inclusive and that is equitable and that is most harmonious for our revolutionary work. Short version.
Thank you, Asante.
Can I-
Zandiswe?
Yes, thank you, Mzuri. In relation to the question that the brother had just presented now around culture, I think that it's always important to understand that culture, right, or cultural practice is not an isolated entity, right? Culture is constantly evolving, and culture is constantly influenced by social dynamics, right? We look at how culture is influenced by capitalism today, right? And how that also reinforces the power dynamics even within our cultural practices. In a matter of that nature, we ought to be able to understand that the most significant thing anyway is the value of the humanity of each person, right? And acknowledging that even within cultural practices. So, for example, if there are cultural practices that continue to isolate women, and we've encountered many of those in actual fact in relation to our setup here, where there's a particular place for women within our society. For example, I am Xhosa in the sense of I'm a Xhosa speaking Africanist, you could put it that way, right? And there are cultural practices that take form in relation to that. And there are particular places where a woman can speak and cannot speak. And we ought to be able to question the notion of where is it that a woman can comfortably be able, for example, to participate in the work of reorganizing and reorientating a particular community at a given time, right? And we must also deal with the fact that culture has been used in actual fact to suppress the voice of women within our society, but also to negate them to a particular corner within our cultures. So I think that it's important to understand that culture is dynamic and culture is constantly evolving, and that there are some things that we have to unlearn within our cultures, and there are some things that we have to relearn in terms of affirming humanity, right? Ubuntu, for example, they would say ukwazumtu, right? Knowing the person and the essence of a human being, right? And giving them, in actual fact, that acknowledgement and that respect. So there's that part of culture which we continue to try by all means to relearn and reinforce, right? But also in relation to a particular political and social setting, right? Where we understand that there's a reality that women exist in this particular framework, if I could put it that way.
Thank you so much, Sister Zandiswe. Are there any other hands that are raised? I think one of the things that you said that was very consistent to what Mjiba said is how we need to examine all areas of our society, even our religious practices. We need to come to examine them all to make sure that they are not exploitative, to make sure that they are engaging and inclusive of all within the society. And so, as you said, we're continuing to evolve, that they're dynamic like life is. And so these are areas and spaces that we're going to, as a part of our taking power, that we are going to ask our sisters who are in the spiritual circles, that we are going to examine those things, and that we're going to ask ourselves, is our culture liberating enough? You know, does it support liberation? And so I think this is a part of what we must do in terms of the work. So I thank you so much for that contribution. And it's very similar to points that Mjiba made. Are there any other questions from the audience before we close? If there are not, we want to thank you all for participating in this forum. We will continue to have these forums. It will be uplinked to YouTube. We invite sisters that are a part of Pan-Africanist revolutionary movements who are interested in joining us in this campaign to communicate with us via myself, Mzuri Pambili at PAMBELI@AOL.com. You can communicate with us on our AAWRU or AAPRP or Revolutionary African Woman Facebook page, as well as in the chat. If you are interested in joining this campaign, we will be writing and submitting periodicals from this discussion and from future discussions. So we are going to continue this work, and we want you to join us and support us and help us expand this to all areas of the globe. So once again, we want to thank our revolutionary African women panelists, Sister Zandiswe, Sister Mohau, both from Pan-African Women's Organization and the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, Dr. ChenziRa Kahina, and Dr. Mjiba Frehiwot from the All African People's Revolutionary Party and All African Women's Revolutionary Union, and the list of other organizations that Dr. Chen has spoken that she is also a part of. And all of those that joined us, that support us, that are a part of this voice, that will help us to continue this conversation and to spread this conversation throughout the Pan-African diaspora. And that will also be allies with us as we continue this work. We thank you so much. We appreciate you. And again, this will be uplinked to YouTube as well. And we will see you within the next couple of months to continue this conversation. We say forward ever, backwards never, ready for the revolution. Is related to Africa.
Is related to.
Forward ever, backwards never.
Forward ever, backwards never.